If you win, my daughter is yours." The alien king never believed a human could win in a galaxy far beyond Earth. There was an alien empire ruled by a powerful king whose name was known across the stars. This empire, vast and full of strange worlds, had long stood at the top, commanding respect from even the most powerful races. The king's throne had been passed down through generations of his family, and his bloodline was considered sacred. He was known for his fierce leadership and his belief that no one could challenge his rule. However, there was one thing that made his rule unique: his daughter, Princess Zara. Princess Zara, unlike many royal heirs, was not simply groomed for a life of luxury. She was strong, intelligent, and independent, but the time had come for her to choose a partner, someone worthy of ruling by her side. The king, having witnessed the many suitors who had failed to meet his expectations, decided to set a test to find a true companion for Zara. This test would not be an easy one. It would be a series of challenges, each one designed to test the skills and strength of those who sought to win her hand. The winner would be granted not only the princess's love, but a place at the side of the king in ruling the empire. The king, however, was confident. His people were strong, their warriors legendary. He did not believe that any outsider, especially not a human, could possibly survive the trials. He had heard rumors of Earth's warriors, but he dismissed them as stories, as nothing more than exaggerated tales. The king, in his pride, believed that no human could ever match the abilities of the warriors in his empire. Yet, he agreed to allow one human to participate, only because the challenge was meant to be for entertainment, not to be taken seriously. Ethan Walker, a soldier from Earth, had heard of the king's challenge. He had been raised to believe that no challenge was too great, no obstacle too impossible. When the opportunity to compete in this contest came up, he knew he had to try. He had no idea how difficult it would be, or the true meaning of the trials, but he believed that he could overcome anything if he put his mind to it. Ethan had always been determined, and he believed that his strength, both physical and mental, could prove the king wrong. When he arrived at the king's palace, the other participants looked at him with amusement. They had never seen a human before, and they doubted his abilities. The king himself barely acknowledged him, treating him as nothing more than a curiosity. But Ethan, undeterred by the sneers and laughter, stood tall and prepared himself for the challenges ahead. As the king announced the first trial, the air was thick with tension. No one believed the human would last. But Ethan's determination burned brighter than the doubts around him. The first trial, the king explained, would take place on a barren planet. It would test endurance, survival, and the ability to think under pressure. A fierce storm would strike the participants, and they would need to navigate through the storm without any aid. The king explained that this was just the beginning of a series of trials, each one more difficult than the last. The other contestants, all alien warriors, seemed confident that they would easily defeat the human. But Ethan stood silently, preparing himself for the storm ahead. As the participants boarded their ships and left for the barren world, Ethan's heart raced. He had trained for this moment his entire life, but he had never faced anything like this before. The alien warriors were larger, stronger, and more accustomed to harsh environments. Yet, he wasn't going to back down. The ship touched down, and they were immediately hit by the fierce winds and dust storms that tore through the planet's surface. The king had made sure to pick the most brutal location, knowing that no one could possibly survive it for long. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he stepped into the storm. The other competitors were already struggling. The winds howled like a beast, trying to tear them apart. The air was thick with dust, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of him. But Ethan wasn't afraid. He had trained in harsh conditions on Earth, facing extreme weather and difficult terrain. He knew how to keep his head clear and focused. As the storm intensified, the other participants began to falter. The alien warriors who had once seemed so confident were now struggling to maintain their balance. But Ethan pushed forward, his footsteps steady and determined. His training had prepared him for this moment, and he wasn't going to let the storm defeat him. As he moved through the chaos, he kept his mind focused on one thing: survival. Meanwhile, Princess Zara watched from a hidden observation deck. She had been forced to stay behind, as her father had decreed that she could not interfere in the trials, but she couldn't help herself. Her eyes were drawn to the human who was still standing, still moving forward, when all the others were collapsing under the storm's fury. She had never seen anyone fight so hard to survive, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of admiration for the human who refused to give up. The king, standing beside her, was watching with an air of detachment. He didn't believe that any human could last. But as the hours passed, his confidence began to waver. Ethan, despite the odds, was still going strong. He fought through the storm with a grit and determination that even the king couldn't ignore. And slowly the king's skepticism turned into something else: respect. Maybe, just maybe, this human was more than he had ever expected. As the storm finally began to subside, Ethan was one of the few remaining participants standing. His body was battered, his face covered in dust, but his eyes were as determined as ever. He had made it through the first trial. And as he looked up at the sky, he knew this was just the beginning. There were more trials to come, but for now, he had proved something to himself and to the king. Princess Zara, her heart pounding in her chest, couldn't take her eyes off Ethan. She had seen many warriors come and go, but none had impressed her like this human. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this human could prove the king wrong. As the participants gathered together again, bruised and weary from the storm, the king announced the next trial. Ethan had survived the first test, but the challenges ahead would be even more difficult. The king still didn't believe the human would last, but something inside him had shifted. The trials were far from over, and he was beginning to wonder if Ethan was truly capable of the impossible. And so, the next challenge was set. The stage was prepared, and the participants lined up once again. The king's eyes remained cold and calculating. But there was a flicker of something else, a question in his mind. Could this human really win? Could he truly defeat the odds and claim the princess's hand? The second trial was about to begin, and Ethan was ready. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. His journey was just beginning. The second trial was one of intellect and cunning. The king believed that no human could match the intellectual prowess of his people. He set up a series of puzzles, each more complex than the last, hoping to break the spirit of the human participant. The king was confident that Ethan's lack of experience with alien technology would be his downfall, but Ethan had always relied on his resourcefulness, and he wasn't going to let this challenge defeat him. The trial took place in a grand hall within the palace, where the air was thick with tension. The walls were lined with alien artifacts, each one more bizarre than the last. The king's subjects watched from the sidelines, whispering among themselves as the competitors were presented with the first puzzle. Ethan, though nervous, stood tall. He knew he had to think quickly. This was his chance to prove that he was more than just a soldier. He was capable of outsmarting even the most advanced beings in the galaxy. The puzzle was unlike anything he had seen before. It was a series of shifting shapes, designed to test both memory and problem-solving skills. The alien participants quickly began to solve the puzzle, their movements swift and precise. But Ethan hesitated, taking a deep breath. He didn't rush. Instead, he carefully studied the shapes, paying close attention to the patterns. He knew that if he made the wrong move, it would all be over. But he was determined to win. Minutes passed, and Ethan's hands worked with steady precision. The alien warriors around him had finished their puzzles, but Ethan was still going. The king's eyes narrowed as he watched, his belief that the human would fail beginning to waver. Ethan wasn't just guessing. He was thinking. The final pieces of the puzzle slid into place, and with a satisfying click, it was done. The crowd fell silent. Ethan had completed the puzzle. He had done the impossible. The king, for the first time, was unsure of himself. He had underestimated the human, and though he would never admit it, something had changed within him. Maybe, just maybe, this human could win. Princess Zara's heart raced. She had never seen anyone work with such determination. Ethan had done what no one else could. As the second trial ended, she found herself thinking about him in a way she hadn't before. There was more to him than she had first realized. And with each challenge, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The next trial was different from anything Ethan had faced before. It wasn't about strength, endurance, or survival. This time, the challenge was one of intellect and strategy. The king had decided that the contestants should face a test of their mind. Ethan had no idea what to expect, but he knew that this trial would be just as important as the others. He could not afford to make a mistake now. The trial was set in a large chamber with walls lined with strange alien devices. The king, from his high throne, explained the rules of the game. It would be a test of strategy, memory, and quick thinking. Ethan and the other participants would each face a series of puzzles that required them to think several steps ahead. The puzzles were designed to confuse and break even the sharpest minds. The king was confident that no human could possibly succeed. As the trial began, the first puzzle was revealed. It was a complex series of shifting lights and symbols. Ethan stared at the glowing patterns, trying to make sense of them. The other contestants, all aliens from different parts of the galaxy, immediately began working on the puzzle. Their hands moved with practiced speed, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. But Ethan felt a rush of nervousness. He had never seen anything like this before. He took a deep breath, remembering his training. He had been trained to stay calm in difficult situations, to think clearly when everything around him seemed to be falling apart. This was just another challenge. The key was to stay focused. He began to examine the symbols more closely, trying to spot patterns. Slowly, the puzzle started to make sense. It wasn't just about the lights. It was about understanding the order in which they needed to be activated. Ethan worked through the puzzle methodically, his mind working quickly but carefully. But he couldn't afford to rush. He knew that if he made a mistake, it would be over. But as he moved through the puzzle, the patterns began to fall into place. The lights blinked in the right sequence, and the first puzzle was solved. The king, who had been watching from his throne with a smug expression, seemed slightly surprised. He had expected the human to fail. But Ethan wasn't done yet. The next puzzle appeared, even more complicated than the first. It involved numbers, symbols, and shifting geometric shapes. It was a mind-bending task that would have broken most people. The alien contestants were moving faster now, confident that they could outpace the human. But Ethan kept his cool. He knew that this was the moment that would define everything. He studied the puzzle, analyzing each piece. The clock was ticking, but he didn't feel rushed. He understood the challenge now. This wasn't just about solving the puzzle. It was about understanding the logic behind it. Slowly, he began to piece together the numbers and symbols, moving them into place with a quiet confidence. The seconds ticked by, and the tension in the room grew. Then, with a final click, the puzzle was solved. Ethan had done it. The room fell silent as the alien contestants stared at him in disbelief. He had completed the second puzzle faster than anyone else. The king's eyes narrowed as he took in the human's success. He had underestimated Ethan, once again. And for the first time, the king's pride was starting to crack. Princess Zara, who had been watching from the observation room, felt a surge of admiration for the human. She had never seen anyone approach the trials with such determination. Ethan wasn't just a fighter. He was clever, resourceful, and sharp-minded. She had always known that she needed a partner who could stand beside her, someone who could match her strength. But she had never imagined it would be a human. She had heard stories of Earth's warriors, but they seemed like fairy tales to her. Now, watching Ethan succeed, she wondered if maybe those stories were true. The trial continued, but Ethan didn't stop there. Each puzzle that appeared seemed more difficult than the last, but he met each one with calm precision. His mind worked as quickly as his hands, moving through the challenges with a focus that surprised everyone in the room. The king, who had been so sure that the human would fail, was now starting to respect him. He had been wrong to dismiss Ethan as nothing more than a curiosity. This human was capable of things that no one had expected. By the time the final puzzle appeared, Ethan had already solved the others, one after the other. His heart was racing, but he kept his composure. The final puzzle was a complex grid, with each square shifting and changing as he touched it. The task was simple: match the patterns, and the puzzle would be complete. But the catch was that the patterns kept changing. The harder he tried, the faster the pieces moved, as if mocking his attempts. But Ethan didn't falter. He slowed down, taking each step with care. His hands moved carefully over the grid, his eyes scanning for the right pieces. As the puzzles shifted and changed, he remained focused, his mind racing ahead of the patterns. Finally, with one last touch, the puzzle was completed. A quiet gasp escaped the crowd as they realized what had just happened. Ethan had done the impossible. The king's expression shifted from one of disbelief to something else: respect. He had watched as the human conquered every mental challenge thrown his way, and he could no longer deny that Ethan had earned his place in the trials. The king's pride, however, wouldn't allow him to admit defeat just yet. He still had one more test for the human, one that he believed would break him for sure. After the mental games, the king knew that it was time to test Ethan's physical strength. The final trial was set to be the ultimate test, one that would prove whether the human was truly worthy of standing beside his daughter. This time, it wouldn't be just about surviving harsh conditions or solving puzzles. This was a fight to the death. The king's elite warrior, a massive alien known for his strength and skill, would face off against Ethan in a battle that would decide everything. If Ethan could defeat the warrior, he would win the princess's hand. If he failed, he would die. There would be no second chances. The arena was vast, a stadium surrounded by high walls, with the audience watching from every angle. Ethan stepped into the ring, his body bruised and battered from the previous trials, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The king looked down from his throne, his eyes filled with expectation. This would be the moment that proved whether Ethan was worthy. The alien warrior stepped into the arena, his muscles rippling with power. He was a towering figure, far stronger than any human. Ethan felt a momentary rush of fear, but he pushed it aside. He had fought in wars, faced enemies far larger and stronger than himself. He had learned to use his mind, his agility, and his willpower to survive. This fight would be no different. The battle began, and the alien warrior charged at Ethan with incredible speed. Ethan dodged, his body moving instinctively. He knew that he couldn't match the alien's strength, but he didn't need to. His strength lay in his ability to outthink his opponent, to use his environment and his skills to his advantage. He weaved and dodged, his movements quick and precise, while the alien swung his fists with brutal force. Ethan saw an opening and took it. He struck the warrior's side, using the momentum of the alien's swing to land a solid blow. The warrior staggered, surprised by the human's strength. Ethan didn't stop. He pressed forward, attacking with a series of quick, precise strikes. The alien warrior was fast, but Ethan was faster. He moved like a shadow, constantly shifting and evading the warrior's attacks. The battle raged on, but Ethan was holding his own. Each blow he landed seemed to weaken the warrior, while each strike against him only fueled his determination. His body ached, his muscles screamed, but he pushed through. The king's expression was one of disbelief. He had expected Ethan to fall, but the human was still standing, still fighting. In the end, it was one final move that sealed the victory. Ethan used his speed to get behind the warrior and knocked him to the ground. The alien warrior, exhausted and defeated, lay at his feet. The crowd erupted in stunned silence. Ethan had done it. He had defeated the greatest warrior in the alien empire. The king, now unsure of himself, stood from his throne. He had been wrong about the human. Ethan had proven himself not just as a warrior, but as someone worthy of his daughter's hand. The king's pride had been shattered, and he realized that the impossible had been achieved. Princess Sarah stepped forward, her heart racing. She had seen the battle, and she had seen Ethan's strength. He had earned his place by her side, not through brute force, but through courage, intelligence, and heart. She had never believed that a human could win. But now, she had no doubt. Ethan had won, and in that moment, he realized that this was just the beginning of something far greater than he could have ever imagined. The final trial was over, and the arena was filled with a stunned silence. Ethan stood there, his chest heaving from the intense battle, his body battered and bruised. He had done the impossible. He had won. The alien warrior lay on the ground, defeated and exhausted. Ethan's movements were slow and calculated, but the fire in his eyes burned brighter than ever. For a moment, the entire arena seemed to hold its breath. The king, sitting on his high throne, stared down at the human in disbelief. His hands, once clenched in anger, were now relaxed by his sides. He had expected Ethan to fail, to fall under the weight of the trials, but instead, the human had triumphed, surviving each challenge and proving his worthiness. The king had never imagined that someone from Earth could stand toe-to-toe with the strongest warriors of the galaxy. But here he was, watching a human conquer what was supposed to be impossible. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he looked up at the king. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no smug satisfaction. He had fought not for glory or power, but for something deeper, a sense of purpose. He had promised himself that he would never back down, no matter how difficult the challenges became. And now, standing in the arena with the defeated warrior at his feet, he felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. The king stood up from his throne, his eyes narrowing as he took in the human's victory. He had underestimated Ethan, but he could not deny the truth now. Ethan had passed every test the king had set before him. He had proven himself stronger than anyone had ever expected, not through sheer power, but through determination, intelligence, and resilience. The king's pride had been shattered. He had believed that no one could challenge his rule, but Ethan had done it. He had beaten the impossible. The king's gaze shifted to his daughter, Princess Zara, who had been watching the battle from the observation deck. Zara's face was unreadable, but her eyes were locked onto Ethan. She had watched him face each trial with a quiet strength, with a determination that had not wavered. She had watched him fight not just for victory, but for something greater, for honor, for respect, for the chance to prove himself. And in the end, he had done it. Zara had always known that her father's trials were not just about finding a worthy partner. They were about finding someone who could match her in strength, in intelligence, and in spirit. And for the first time, she realized that the man who had won her heart wasn't someone who had defeated the strongest warriors of the galaxy just for the sake of winning. He had done it because he believed in something greater than himself. He had believed in the possibility of victory no matter the odds. The king's voice rang out, breaking the silence. "Ethan Walker, you have done what no one else could. You have proven yourself worthy of my daughter's hand. You have defeated my warriors, conquered my trials, and earned your place by her side." His voice, once full of pride and certainty, now carried an edge of reluctant respect. "I admit I was wrong to doubt you." Ethan, still standing in the arena, didn't respond at first. He simply nodded, accepting the king's words without the need for further praise. The battle had never been about winning the princess's hand. It had been about proving to himself that he was capable of facing the unknown and overcoming the impossible. And now, he knew that he had done just that. Zara slowly descended from the observation deck, her eyes never leaving Ethan. As she approached him, her heart raced. She had seen so many suitors in her life, each one trying to win her favor with their strength, their riches, or their status. But none had ever impressed her the way Ethan had. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he had something far more valuable: courage, determination, and a heart full of integrity. When Zara reached Ethan, she looked into his eyes and saw the same quiet strength that had carried him through each trial. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no pride. There was only the calm confidence of a man who had earned his place, not through force, but through the power of his character. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion, "you have done what I thought was impossible. You've proven that strength is not just about power, but about heart." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I choose you, not because of your victories, but because of who you are. You've shown me that true strength lies in your spirit, in your willingness to fight for what you believe in." Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he looked at Zara. He had never expected this moment to come. He had come to the alien empire to prove himself, not to win the heart of a princess. But as he stood before her, he realized that he had found something far more valuable than victory. He had found someone who saw him for who he truly was, someone who understood that the trials were never just about winning, but about facing the impossible with courage and heart. The king, watching the exchange between his daughter and the human, felt a strange sense of pride. He had watched Zara grow, had seen her become the strong, independent woman she was today. But now, watching her choose Ethan, he realized that she had found someone who could match her strength, someone who could stand by her side as an equal. He had thought that the trials were only about testing Ethan's strength, but now he understood that the trials had been just as much about testing Zara's heart. And in that moment, he saw the truth. Ethan was not just a man who had passed the trials. He was the man who had earned Zara's heart. As the crowd erupted into applause, the king's voice echoed through the arena once more. "Let it be known," he said, "that Ethan Walker has proven himself not only as a warrior, but as a true partner to my daughter. He will stand by her side, not as a conqueror, but as an equal." Zara reached out and took Ethan's hand, her heart swelling with pride. This was the moment she had been waiting for, not just to choose a partner, but to choose someone who had earned her respect, her trust, and her love. Together they turned to face the future, a future that was not defined by the trials they had faced, but by the journey they would take together. The impossible had been achieved, and in that moment, as they stood side by side, they knew that anything was possible. The king, for the first time, saw the truth in Ethan's eyes. And he knew, deep down, that he had made the right choice. He had underestimated this human, but in the end, it was the human who had shown him what true strength really was.